about the Nile River basin in general, and then how Egyptian foreign policy approached Nile basin crisis. Let's talk about firstly, briefly, Nile basin in general. Nile basin consists of 11 countries, including Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. There are two main tributaries of the Nile River. One of them is called the Blue Nile and emerging from the Lake Tana in Ethiopia, and the other one is emerging from the Lake Victoria in Uganda and is called the White Nile. Both Blue Nile and White Nile unifies in the capital of Sudan, Khartoum, and flows through the Egypt and towards the Mediterranean Sea. However, all the Blue Nile basin consists of Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, mostly disputed area in general Nile basins. Although Ethiopia contributes more than 80% of the Nile waters, Egypt and Sudan has utilized more water than Ethiopia. However, after the Cold War, we see that Ethiopian unilateral projects such as the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, mainly, as Egyptians argue, that mainly threatened the Egyptian and Sudanese water security. And however, we see that the Egyptian hydro hegemony has been established through the British era between 1882 and 1956 in Egypt. Since Egypt has highly dependent on the Nile waters in terms of agricultural production and production of electricity in general, Nile River has been highly regarded as one of the fundamental pillars of the Egyptian foreign policy. Since Egypt has been hegemon in the Nile basin in terms of water utilization and water management, Egypt has highly regarded the continuity of the statu quo in the Nile basin, which was established through in the colonial era in the basin in general. Therefore, Egypt has regarded as national regarded as national security threat in terms of any unilateral projects in the upstream regions, for example, in Ethiopia and the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Therefore, Egypt approach as a national security matter towards the Nile River, and in domestic politics, we see securitization in terms of in order to consolidate the Egyptian public. For example, according to Gabriel, he says that the dispute between Ethiopia and Egypt has been considered as the oldest geopolitical rivalry in terms between Ethiopia and Egypt regarding the water utilization in the Nile basin. For example, another example can be given from the Robert Collins, one of the most influential Nile historian. He says that any upstream developmental project from Cheops until Muhammed Ali Pasha, from Muhammed Ali Pasha towards Sisi has been considered as historic paranoia. Namely, we see that any upstream developmental project has been considered as national security threat by the Egyptian foreign policy decision makers, as Robert Collins considered is historic paranoia. As I mentioned, due to British military campaigns and diplomatic efforts, Egyptian hydro hegemony in the Nile basin was established. For example, 1929 agreement and 1959 agreement supported this hydro hegemony in the Nile River basin. However, when the Free Officers military coup happened in Egypt, Jamal Abdel Nasser became the president of the country. For example, he highly mentions about the importance of the Nile River regarding the agricultural production and in terms of electricity. For example, in his famous book called Philosophy of the Revolution, he mentions about three circles of Egyptian foreign policy. One of them is Arab, and the other is Africa, and third one is Islam. For example, according to Jamal Abdel Nasser, why Africa is important for the Egyptian foreign policy? Because of the Nile River, and Nasser describes Nile River as an Egyptian artery of life. Therefore, as in the case of the colonial era, Jamal Abdel Nasser also considered any upstream developmental project as a national security threat. On the other hand, we see Enver Sedat, for example, since during the Enver Sedat era, Ethiopia initiated several developmental projects on the Lake Tana. However, as a president of the Egypt, Enver Sedat highly criticized the Ethiopia's initiative, and he says we depend upon the Nile 100% in our life. So if anyone at any moment thinks to deprive us of our life, we shall never hesitate to go to war, because it's a matter of life or death. As I mentioned, Enver Sedat considers Nile River as a matter of life and death. After the signing of the Camp David agreement with Israel, Enver Sedat also mentions about the importance of the Nile River, importance of the Ethiopian developmental project. For example, he says the only matter that could take Egypt to war again is water. Yani, Egypt, under the leadership of Enver Sedat, highly criticizes Ethiopia regarding the water utilization. On the other hand, we see in the post-Cold War era, there are several challenges to Egyptian hydro hegemony in the basin. On the other hand, we see also Egypt change its approach towards the Nile River. For example, Boutros Ghali, as a foreign minister of Egypt and later General Secretary of the United Nations, he put Africa as the most important circle of the Egyptian foreign policy because of the Nile. Boutros Ghali also criticizes the Egyptian approach in the historical period towards the because of the conflictual approach. Therefore, he initiated several organizations such as UNDUGU, Teponil, and Nile Basin Initiative. However, after that, Nile Basin Initiative and its famous agreement, Cooperative Framework Agreement, has been considered as diplomatic challenge to Egyptian foreign policy. On the other hand, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam also has been considered as a fact on the ground challenge, which is highly threatening the Egyptian hydro hegemony and Egyptian water utilization in the Nile River. Therefore, I want to give another example from the Ebul Ahmed Gate, who is currently the General Secretary of the Arab League, and he served as a foreign minister of Egypt from 2004 and 2011. He mentioned about his memoirs the 5 national security concerns regarding the Egyptian foreign policy, and they are Israel, Red Sea, Arabian Gulf, and Nile River. However, he mentions about the importance of the Nile River, saying that one of my chief concerns as foreign minister and the most critical for our national security is the Nile River. I want to give briefly about the importance of the Nile River in the Morsi government and the SCC government. Although the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and Egyptian approach in the beginning was a bit contradictory, Morsi government changed the Egyptian approach towards the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Although he was initially responded to cooperation, but soon, because of the public pressure and the opposition pressure, Islamist Morsi also changed his direction towards the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. For example, since Islamist Party of Life, his leader says, if diplomacy fails, the military intervention is the solution to preserve the Nile water, Egyptian Nile water. Morsi responded, all options are on the table. And later on, Morsi stated that if Nile River loses one drop, our blood is the alternative. Morsi government also threatened Ethiopia via war. His prime minister, Hashim Kandil, like Enver Sedat, he also considered Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and the Nile River in general matter of life or death. For example,
sorry, can I encourage you to draw to a close and hand on to your colleague, just because we're going to be a bit tight on time otherwise.
I want to also mention about Samih Shukri, who is currently Egyptian foreign minister. He says Egypt is facing an existential threat. For example, Sisi also says we do not threaten anyone, but nobody will take a drop of water from Egypt. Otherwise, there will be a state of unimaginable stability in the region. I give a few examples regarding the Egyptian foreign policy approach towards the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and Nile River in general. And so,
briefly, if you may. Briefly, if I may.
Briefly, I am done with my presentation, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought there were more. Yes, please take over.
Thank you, Hasan.
Professor
Thank you, Hasan. Thank you, Professor. Indeed, as my colleague mentioned about the background of Nile River, so it's deepening as we witnessed in recent years. The crisis has been deepening between two sides, and it's becoming a regional and international problem. Crisis matter in international relations. When we look at the general characteristics or transforming characteristics of international relations in recent years, religions or religious institutions started to play more important role, significant role in policy making or policy implementation process. And as we see, Azhar as the most influential and the greatest religious institution in Egypt and even in Sunni world, particularly in Arab world and generally in Sunni world. So Azhar started to use more legitimizing rhetoric in Egyptian domestic politics, and also it has some influence on Egyptian foreign policy parameters as well. Indeed, historically, since the Jamal Abdel Nasser era, al-Azhar turned to a legitimizing instrument apparatus of Egyptian foreign policy. And also we know that Jamal Abdel Nasser benefited from the influential feature of or influential body of al-Azhar in Middle Eastern politics and even in international relations to create a field of maneuver or a field of penetration in Muslim world. And today we are witnessing that Azhar started to have an influential position in GERD project against Ethiopian government. And indeed, the crisis has deepened since last year with the start of the second filling of the Great Dam, the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, and also Azhar, and more specifically its Grand Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib increased his volume of the discourse to legitimize Egyptian stance on GERD. Indeed, he mentioned that by referring to Islamic jurisprudence or the verses of Quran or the words of the Prophet Muhammed, peace be upon him, Ahmed al-Tayyib, the Grand Sheikh of al-Azhar, legitimized himself by referring to the prevention of monopolizing natural resources in Islam. And according to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there is no monopoly over three natural things for a human being, and also water, grass, and fire are common values for all mankind, and no one can limit the utility of these things, these natural things for others. And when we look at the general discourse or rhetoric of Azhar, the leading figures, top leaders of al-Azhar, like Ahmed al-Tayyib, the Grand Sheikh of Grand Imam of Azhar, they refer to this word of the Prophet Muhammad to legitimize their position. And also they are blaming Ethiopian government to monopolize the water of Nile, or even the utility of Nile waters. However, they ignored that Egypt had and still trying to pursue its hegemony over the Nile River for centuries. And today, no one can prevent the utility of Nile waters according to Islamic jurisprudence. And from this perspective, Azhar is trying to Islamize the matter of Nile crisis by referring to the hadiths of the Prophet, the words of the Prophet Muhammed, and also they give some specific refers to the rules of divine rules and even the rules of and tradition of Islamic jurisprudence. And also, according to Ahmed al-Tayyib, Egyptian government now is trying to steal the God bestowed resources, and they are trying to monopolize over the Nile waters with illegal ways. However, and that's why Ahmed al-Tayyib called international society to take an action against Ethiopia, and also they demanded, they requested them to interfere the process and even to implement some sanctions on Ethiopian government to make their claims over the Nile in their claims over the Nile, and they legitimize their position by referring to water is common and collective property, that no one has the right to undermine it. And from this perspective, we clearly see that Egypt tries to even Egypt has a concern and has a fear to lose its historical sovereignty, historical hegemony over the Nile River. And that's why even al-Azhar tries to mobilize Egyptian people through their Islamic discourses. And even we can claim that al-Azhar is currently exacerbating or exaggerating the Nile River to deepen the crisis, crisis between Egypt and Ethiopia. And also we are witnessing that although the presence of some diplomatic negotiations or political attempts, even al-Azhar has more radical position than any other political institutions or establishments in Egyptian politics. And when we take al-Azhar, as Azhar is the largest Islamic institution, the most influential institution in Egypt into consideration, so we clearly say that Azhar cannot pursue such a rhetoric or cannot follow such a strategy without the permission of Sisi government or any other Egyptian political establishment. And also Azhar is trying to legitimize the state policies, to securitize Egyptian policies, and also to claim the survivability of Egypt over the Nile basin, and also to pursue the historical claim of Egypt, historical sovereignty claim of the Egypt over the Nile River. And also we see that that issue, this crisis, is turning to not only a physical matter, but also a metaphysical issue, because all religious institutions and also religions played a crucial role in the process. Not only Azhar, but also Coptic church in Egypt, and also Ethiopian Muslims and Ethiopian Christians have worked towards the Nile crisis. And when we take their position into consideration, now religious institutions started to play another role besides diplomatic institutions, also political elites and state leaders as well. And even in Egyptian politics, the government is using al-Azhar as a functional instrument to preserve the status quo in Egyptian domestic politics, and through al-Azhar, even the government intends to mobilize Egyptian people for a sustainable support for the policies of Egypt towards the Nile River. And when we look at Ahmed al-Tayyib's rhetoric or other leading Azhar sheikhs rhetoric, even they refer to a holy fight, a holy war against Ethiopia to save the rights of Egyptian people. And according to them, it's a national interest and national security matter for Azhar, and that's why they clearly, they easily use Islamic terminology to legitimize themselves. And they, by the way, they don't only use the Islamic terminology in khutbahs or the religious meetings or prayers or mosque, but also they use some social media organs to mobilize people. And also they created some platforms through social media accounts on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Also they posted some films to support.
I'm so sorry
just
to
in
interrupt.
1 minute, yeah, Professor, in 1 minute,
Yes, if you could
I
close
conclude.
in 1 minute.
Yeah,
Thank
in 1
you.
minute. I need just 1 minute. Thank you for your understanding. And also they posted a film entitled "The Nile is Our Life." So through this way, al-Azhar played a role to mobilize Egyptian people for the support to Egyptian government. And also I can give another example, what arguments or what instruments al-Azhar used for this matter. And even al-Azhar Research Academy published its first book on Nile River question as well. So as we see, al-Azhar and his leaders, his sheikhs and imams use a strong rhetoric to legitimize Egyptian presidency and also Egyptian politics towards the Azhar. And also they use social media platforms and academic books, and also they create new scholarly platforms in international relations. And also they try to contact with Arab worlds and other religious institutions in Arab world. And also they try to mobilize Islamic institutions, more specifically in Sunni world, to find a strong support for Egypt against Ethiopia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.